The Indie Writers Club is brought to you by Publish Drive. With one click, self-publish your ebooks, audiobooks and print books to thousands of stores and libraries worldwide. And now you can start for free forever. Publish Drive's new free plan lets you publish your first ebook to 35 stores worldwide absolutely free. No subscription fees, no commissions. Keep 100% of the royalties. Get your titles online in just a few minutes at publishdrive.com.
It's the Indie Writers Club with Cara, Claire and James Blatch. A place to relax, chat, learn and vent about life as an independent author. Get episode alerts and links at indiewritersclub.com. Now, here's Cara and James.
Hello, welcome to the Indie Writers Club. I am Cara Claire.
And I'm James Blatch. And if you're watching on YouTube, I have apologised because I have half my dog on me. Can you see that?
You can't actually, no. I can't see it from here.
No. The dog is in
here. You've just alerted everyone to it.
The dog in question. Enzo, your hair's all over me. Yeah, don't look like that.
I think Enzo needs to come and say hi to the camera for proof.
I don't know if I can get him round. Enzo, come on. Come here. What's this? Come here.
For everyone listening, this is like massively boring, but for those, he's so adorable. For those on YouTube,
Who's that?
There's a beautiful, beautiful dog. Flop to YouTube to see Enzo, everyone. He doesn't he have a collar that says the best boy?
Goodest boy.
The goodest
boy. And the other dog we have has a collar saying my favourite child, which the children were quite good about. And they just said, yeah, fair enough. We understand that. Well, I met up with some friends at the weekend and they all took their children and I didn't have my son with me. So I said, I'll bring my favourite child. And they were like, you mean the dog? I was, Yes. Okay, look. There you go, Enzo. Thank you very much. I've got even more of your hair on me now. Okay. We have 2 episodes in a row, kind of dovetail each other to talk about craft. We haven't talked about craft for a while, so we are going to talk about character development in this episode, what it is, why it's important, how you achieve it. And tomorrow we're going to go through storytelling ideas, storytelling fundamentals. Excuse me.
You mean next week? We're recording tomorrow, but it's not going to be broadcast till next week.
Good say.
because James is going away and he's not allowed to record because he's actually taking a holiday. So we're recording 2 days in a row, but you will get them a week apart.
My aim is for it to be the first time I've been away and not worked on holiday for about 10 years. That's my aim. The only thing I'm going to do, Cara Claire, is I'm going to write.
Are you? Which brings, we were actually going to do a little bit of an update, weren't we, on our personal projects, because we haven't done the Word Count Club in a while because it got a bit too big. And so we haven't really talked about what we're doing. So how are you doing? What are you writing? Are you writing?
I am writing. So I'm writing a little bit every day, although at 11:18 I haven't written today because my call started at 7:30 this morning.
Oh, God.
I am writing. Yeah, book 4, Stolen Angel is the working title, and I've talked about it before, but it's same universe. It's the MI5 field agent from book 1, and the other characters who are in book 1 do appear in lesser roles in this. And it's a bit more spy espionage than the previous ones. And I'm struggling a little bit with story. I got to kind of a 30,000 word point and then really stalled like for months with work and everything else. Talked about that. I have got over that hump. So that whole sequence that I knew what was going to happen, the whole sequence I have written now, which is great and it's worked out really well, but it has left me reworking exactly how things are going to line up to get to that point. And I'm unapologetically, it is the right thing for me to do. I'm going back to the beginning. I'm like 6 chapters in from the beginning now, rewriting. I need to do that. It's just the process I need to follow. I can't carry on the book. Because I don't sort of write these down and plot them. I just have them in my head. Now, this is where the story is. I need to write it.
Can't remember how much you plot an outline. Do you work to an outline?
So what I normally do, and I did this at the beginning, I write a 2,000 to 5,000 word version of the story. So quite a long description of the story. And I work for that. I probably never look at that again. Normally don't read it again, maybe once or twice, but max. But then having written it, I'm then writing the book because I know where it's going to go. And this one has not come as easily. So I've written the first part of it. I sort of know where it's going to end. But I needed there to be, it's just that thing that, this girl's gone rogue from MI5 and MI6. she's taken herself off to Paris to try and crack the case. She needs to crack the case. So her needs weren't strong enough. But what she's doing, so I came up with much better device at the beginning for her being framed for the death of a colleague. And she knows it's because she could identify somebody they found in a dead drop, an agent working in London. Randomly, she can identify her because she's a genius at fashion and clothes. I think I mentioned this before.
I remember us talking about this, yeah.
So she had one look at this coat and she knew straight away this is not a regular off-the-shelf Christian Dior coat. This is very likely one that was bought in the shop from one of their salons in Paris. And of course, no one else in MI6 knows that. She's kept it to herself at the beginning because she's not sure what's going on. And then when she's framed for the murder of a colleague, she knows she has to solve this case, work out who's behind it, because there's somebody inside the organization is going to make sure that she's in prison rather than able to help. So she doesn't trust anybody, working by herself. And that framing, her being framed, that wasn't there before. All that was there was that there was sexism at MI5. They didn't like her there. She overstepped the mark. She got fired and then decided to prove herself to MI6 so she could become where she wants to work as an officer at MI6. But that motivation was nothing like the same as coming back to a burnt out car and realizing actually it's slightly better than that. She comes back to the burnt out car. She has indulged me for a second.
I'm indulging, yeah. I don't really have a choice.
She's one of the 3 women left from a brief program to have women working in MI5, and it didn't go down very well with the men, and anything that goes wrong is blamed on them. And so that's very, very actually true 60s, 70s period. But the one person who backed her, the one person who got her out in the field, he hanged himself after this incident when they discovered this officer on the street, this woman in the Christian Dior coat. Now, that's what's upset her. So he was obviously having an affair with her, and that's not his fault. It's going to turn out that it was a complete honey trap. The moment they took her down outside this dead drop, he realized this was not just some random woman he was having an affair with. He had been honey trapped. And he was
you just spoiled that. That's such a spoiler.
He's very stiff upper lip, and for him, his marriage was over, his career was over, and he couldn't face it, so he hanged himself. That's when she sort of lets it be known she can find out she's got a way. She still doesn't trust people to tell them, but she's got a way of working out who this dead woman is, which is going to lead them. And she's sent out on an overnight stakeout as part of this project. She decides, because Roger always backed the women and always wanted the women, and he actually said to her, look, you can next time take Maggie under your wing, one of the other girls, and you can start training her up. Roger's dead. Skinner hates her, who's the boss, but she last moment, on a whim, she says to Maggie, come out with me tonight. We'll start working together. And she's like, has it been approved? Oh, yes, definitely it's been authorised. Of course, it hasn't. So she goes out there. The car goes up in flames from a supposed IRA bomb, 1970 London, very typical. Maggie is killed only because Susie was using the loo in the pub nearby. She comes back and in those few seconds works out that was supposed to be her. Nobody else knew. Nobody else knew Maggie was in the car. Nobody. So she's on the run from that moment. And that's a much better motivation. She can't go back to the office, can't go back to MI6. She can only go to Paris to the Christian Dior shop and start to follow this trail and work out who's behind it. And MI6, of course, following her, but she's always one step ahead because she's actually much better than the men at this stuff. So that's
take us the wrong way, but I actually would quite like to read that.
Yeah. How could an author take that the wrong way? Yeah. So
because before you started talking, I wasn't that interested.
Yeah. But now we're on the run, aren't we? And MI6 are bearing down on her. The stakes are much higher. So I'm going back and rewriting that to get to that point. And it's not massive changes. It's tweaking the scenes of what happened. And I want to do that. I know a lot of people listening will be saying, just plow on, go forward and then go fix it afterwards. But everyone has a different process, and that's why.
And I think that's where you've got to listen to your gut instincts. Like you are a writer, like you know yourself. So if you feel like you've got to go back and do that, then do that. Everybody works slightly differently, and you've written enough books now that you can trust yourself that if that's what you feel like you need to do, you're not doing it. I think it's one of those moments where you've got to be honest with yourself and go, am I doing this as a procrastination tool, or do I actually need to do it? And if you can be brutally honest with yourself and go, no, it needs to be done, then go for it.
Yeah, I think so. I do think when I talk about my story, I do realise I kill people a lot. Death is definitely a theme with my books.
Part of the genre, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I write a lot of sex scenes. You write a lot of murders. It's just the way it is.
quite dark and you're quite light and happy.
I mean, I kill a lot of people too, actually.
Yes.
Because it's fantasy, paranormal fantasy romance. So there's also quite a lot of...
I had a chat with one of our Vinci Books authors this morning, a wonderful man called Chris Allen, lives in Australia, south of Sydney. And he writes thrillers, modern day, international sort of secret subdivision of the United Nations that goes around fixing problems. Very good stories. And book 5 in his series, his working title is Shapeshifter, which sort of in his line of names, like his titles are Defender, Hunter, they all end in ER. So Shapeshifter. And I had to say to him, obviously as his publisher, saying that is a fairly significant trope in romance. And he's like, in what way? How would Shapeshifter be? So then I explained to him how it is. I still don't think he was utterly convinced by it, but he was immediately like, let's change the name.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because when you're immersed in that world and then you come up against people who aren't, they're like, hang on, what? They shift into a polar bear. Does she have sex with the polar bear? And I'm like, no.
She has sex with the man.
Gross. Yeah, but when he shifts into a bear, he's just a bear.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
They're the rules. And that's always been the case with werewolves, isn't it? You only have sex with them when they're in human form.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, that's a whole different sort of...
Talking of werewolves, we're going to come on to character development in a moment. And
we are.
Interestingly, Twilight comes up. If you Google...
I read your notes.
You start researching examples where character development has been criticised was not good, and Twilight comes up. But it probably was... I'm sure it was deliberate by the author, but anyway, we'll talk about that in a moment. Look, we want to mention the Irish publishing show.
We do.
Ireland's publishing show, which is taking place in March funnily enough, in Ireland. Beautiful part of the Emerald Isle on the west coast. The wild Atlantic Way, absolutely stunning part of Northern Europe if you haven't been there. It is going to take place in a hotel in a place called Dromoda, I think. Is it Dromoda? Something like that. Just trying to look up the actual dates. I think we are going to be... So you and I are both there. We're both talking. So come and say hello. Come and join us. It's a good... If you've not been to a writers' conference before, it's a good one to start at. It's going to be quite small, quite intimate. Get an opportunity just to relax, talk books for a couple of nights, have a few drinks, have some nice meals with people, go for a walk in the countryside, and then come back. And if you're in the UK in particular, you'll get flights for like 20 quid. I mean, they are so cheap at the moment.
Yeah, it's a good one to dip your toe in with, because if you are UK based, getting there is so quick and easy. And it's also, it starts the day after St. Patrick's Day. So if you want to arrive a day early and have a bit of a, although be careful because you don't want to start the conference with a giant hangover.
It's Ireland, the 18th of March, everyone will have a giant hangover. So we are arriving on the 17th. And the conference itself is 18th, 19th, 20th, something like that, I think.
Yes.
And then coming back on the Thursday night.
Yeah.
So
I believe the 18th is like the registration day, the day where you check in, say hi to everyone. And then the actual, conferencing is the Wednesday and the Thursday, the 19th and 20th.
And we have a discount code.
We do.
A lovely discount code for you, which gives you, I think, €85 off. So it's very well worth it, something like that. So if you go to indiewritersclub.com/Ireland.
Was that your Irish accent?
That's my Irish accent.
Ireland.
It?
Ireland. It was so quick, I missed it.
I do like the name, the word Ireland. Of course, in Ireland, they say era, but we say Ireland.
Yeah. I mean, if you come to the conference and see James in person,
I could do the accent
you get to experience his range of accents in real life.
So indiewritersclub.com/Ireland. Come and join me and Cara, and our friend Robin is going to be there.
Yeah, and Adam Beswick's going to be there. I believe Tony Lee. There's some great people talking. Go and check out the Facebook page, have a look at the speakers. And it's one of those things where people talk quite a lot about how to start building like your tribe and your community. And genuinely, going to conferences is one of the best ways to do it if you're just starting out and you're really looking for those kind of starting to build friendships, because it's quite hard to do it digitally. So definitely, if you're on the fence, book it.
Yep. And we'll see you there. Now, do you want to talk about your book? And then we'll move on to our main subject.
You sound so enthusiastic. Do you want to talk about your book? So actually, you know what? I'm not writing anything personally at the moment. I'm concentrating on ghostwriting because I did something I don't usually do, which is that I recognise that like stressful life events sometimes affect your ability to work. And And I think normally, not just from a time perspective, so everybody knows I've been going through a divorce. We're just at the point where the house sale is about to complete, kind of everything is sort of coming to a head in terms of like, you know, that bit of selling a house where it's suddenly the last few weeks, all you're doing is replying to emails, running around here, there and everywhere to solicitors. Normally, I would kind of look at that just from a time perspective. And I'd be like, well, it's okay. I can work in the evenings, make up the time, all of that kind of stuff. But actually, I'm really quite stressed and emotionally drained by it. So I've actually acknowledged that for once, which is probably the first time I have, and gone, I'm just going to focus on ghostwriting until this next 4-week period is over.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the brain space to be being like really super creative with my own stuff. And the ghostwriting stuff that I do, there's a very detailed outline. There's, you know, a word count that I've got to meet every week. But I've also I feel like I'm growing as a person. I've even spoken to them and said, I'm under quite a lot of stress at the moment. Is it okay if we just lower the target every week for what I need to hand in? And they were like, absolutely, no problem. So I'm actually kind of taking some steps to look after myself, which is quite something. I think when you go full time, you feel the pressure. If you're not writing, you really do feel that like, but if I'm not producing books, if I'm not doing this amount of words a week, and the fact is I'll catch up, like I will catch up as long as I look after myself and don't get burnt out. So I'm at the moment writing about a plague in the Canadian wilderness post EMP, electromagnetic pulse that's taken out all the electricity in the country for my ghostwriting project. And then once the house sale and all that stuff is over and done with, I'll be writing my second Mafia Vampire book.
So an EMP, which took everything out, then a plague on top of that.
Yeah, this is book 8 in the series. So they've had some bad luck.
Yeah, there's bad stuff happening. Whereabouts in Canada, by the way, because I'm going to Canada on Sunday.
It's like Thunder Bay area.
I don't know where that is.
A huge like wilderness lake kind of area. I mean, I make up a lot of the geography, to be fair.
You just make up more, yeah. So it's nowhere I'm going to go to. That sounds good, but you are the key thing is not a key thing, but you are still writing.
Yes.
You know, I think that pressure thing. It's funny, isn't it? Whatever our levels are, if you're not exceeding it, you feel kind of anxious that you're not. That's a crazy way of living life. But I know it's drive and it gets stuff done, but I'm sort of there as well. If I haven't written, sure, I'll have to let the dog out in a second. If I haven't written and I haven't exercised, I'm trying a half marathon next month. I'm really terrible at running at the moment. I feel a bit shitty in the evening about myself, and you know that. And the only cure really is to make sure you do your writing and do a run. Then I feel great in the evening. I can relax.
Yeah, I think I definitely had got into that. I think because I know what my maximum is that I can achieve, and because my word count can be so high when I'm in a good headspace and everything, I really do beat myself up if I'm not achieving that. So I'm being just super, super strict with what's on my to-do list. And actually our little talk about, you know, that little infographic when we were doing the Razors episode that was things that were urgent and important and that sort of thing. That's been in the back of my head quite a lot this week, actually, with just making sure that my energy goes towards the things that actually are urgent and important and other things that really can wait. For example, I'm chomping at the bit to get my TikTok shop started. Seeing everybody else doing so well on TikTok shop, I know readers are going to go crazy for my special editions. Like I really have that, like in Clifton Strength speak, I'm activator number 1. So I've really got that like, oh my God, I want to get started. But I'm having to just be so strict with myself and go, I don't have any spare energy at the moment to divert to something else. So that is not urgent and it's not important in the next 4 weeks. So it's getting put on to manage at the end of February.
Yeah, well
done.
Of
the list. Yeah.
I think I need to be. I think that organisation is actually a key to a lot of the issues that people have, and I definitely have that. And I can be a bit scatty during my working day, just bounce from one thing that needs to be done to another, rather than think, okay, for the next 2 hours. There's a book called Deep Work that Ferrell Vernon at Written Word Media told me about in Vegas. He said it's life changing because it moves you from the way I work currently to actually being productive for 2 hours on one thing and nothing else matters. And the difference is immense, he said, in productivity.
I might investigate that. I feel like we should have an indie writers club, book club,
yes,
like a craft book club, because I've got a couple of craft book recommendations because we're going to talk about character development, aren't we?
Yes.
which I think will bring us back to talking about our own stories quite a bit, giving examples and things like that. But I've got a couple of craft book recommendations as well.
We need to get going on craft because we're 21 minutes in already.
Are we? Okay, let's go.
Small edit. So we are going to talk about character development. So in the past, I love that quote. I don't know if it was yours originally or you came up with it, saying that people come for the story, but they stay for the characters. And I think that's absolutely right. And the very best films you watch, the very best books you read, character development is writ large on every page. And that's what makes you turn the page, not just is the bomb going to go off, because you kind of know the bomb's not going to go off in my genre, for instance. But you don't know how the character's going to react. And that's what you need to find out, because we set intriguing characters. So we talk about character development as being this about transformation of characters and depth to characters rather than being shallow and nothing happening to them. I've read quite a lot about it over the last couple of days. We researched this episode. So some quotes here. At its core, characters need to feel like real people who grow and change in response to the events of the stories. That's where, and we'll come across it in a minute, I think it references the Twilight Saga as being an example where Bella is a bit of a passenger through the story. The things happen around her and she reacts to them rather than her being the person who's changing as a result or making changes. Although there's also a hat tip to the fact that that was probably deliberate to make her the kind of blank canvas that the reader can project themselves, I'm in this story, onto.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, and I think it's when you're first starting, I think you tend to focus on plot, and when you get this story idea and all of your focus goes onto that. So if you've not really thought about character development before, it is that thing of needing to have a character that grows throughout the story and to see them changing and growing alongside the plot. And even in romance, even with people kind of assume that with spicy romance, it's just about the sex scenes. But when I go to like book signings and reader events and stuff, the thing that people talk to me about, it's not the sex scenes, it's the characters. They'll be like, oh my God, I love Sam. Like, I was so happy when X happened to him. Or, oh my God, I was so desperate for those two to just overcome the problems that were keeping them apart. And then when they did, that's the thing that people remember and talk to me about. So it's important no matter what genre you're writing.
So we're going to move into talking about what constitutes that character journey and then more practical advice on how you can create it. And there are tips and tricks for doing that. So internal conflict is a key thing that you need to have. Characters should wrestle with competing desires and values that create tension in their decision making. An example of this might be a character struggling between loyalty to their family and pursuit of their dreams. And an example later in my notes, I know we're going to come across again, but I've obviously been researching, so I remember the examples. And one is of Ned Stark in Game of Thrones. In the first few episodes of Game of Thrones, Ned Stark is torn between his loyalty to the king, he's the hand of the king, and protecting his family. And the reason there's a conflict there is because being near the king and involved in that politics is incredibly dangerous and risky. And he loves his family and his daughters in particular more than anything in the world. And so that's a genuine internal struggle that you can then stick an event in front of him. Like the king says, bring your family down. I want them down here for the next month, for the summer, to hunt with me. And he doesn't want to take his family down, but he wants to be loyal to the king. So that's the sort of thing you can engineer. So you can create a conflict inside that's only internal. And then you can give an event that fleshes that out and causes them to have to face and have to wrestle with. And that's where you get, that's, as a 101 in getting character.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the way you have to start becoming have a little bit of an interest in human psychology, I think, as a writer. And I think we talked very early on, didn't we, about people who are either naturally super good at the plot and the story, and so they don't have to think too much about that, or naturally quite good at understanding people. And I think I tend to be quite an empathic person and read people quite well. So it's something that I find it quite hard to distill it and kind of explain it to people. But you really do have to start kind of looking at, okay, so where did that come from? Why does he feel like he has to be loyal to the king? Like, why does he feel that? What is it about himself that he feels like he's going to fail if he doesn't do that? Like, what are the actual personal consequences? So you really have to keep drilling down and asking, but why? But why? But why? But why, until you get like to the absolute core of why that is. And then that's what makes it so powerful, Because if you can kind of seed in these really deep-seated reasons why he feels that way and why it's going to be such a conflict, that's where you get the drama and the pull for the reader to go through the story, because they're invested on a human level, because they're like, oh, okay, this is a big deal.
Yeah. And another aspect of the character, which you need to think about from the beginning, and it's a fun aspect of them, but I think it's a mistake that's quite common amongst rookie writers at the beginning, is don't make your characters perfect. So flaws and contradictions make characters feel authentic. Perfect characters are rarely interesting. Readers connect more with characters who have realistic shortcomings, blind spots, and internal contradictions. These flaws should ideally connect to the character's arc and the themes of the stories. If you take Ned Stark, for instance, you could have him on one side or the other doing stuff that you as a reader know is a mistake, but he thinks is the right thing because he's got a blind spot there. Perhaps love for his family is causing him to put them in danger. Again, that would be a perfect little way of weaving in solid amounts of character, the flaw of the character, and the story happening.
Yeah, so they often have this core misbelief, and then that causes them to act in a certain way. So he believes that in order to keep his family safe, he needs to do X, Y, Z. And as a reader, quite often you can see that. You can see that's not right. That's not the thing. But the whole point is that he's not going to come to that realization quickly. If you think of your character as an actual real person, I'm 38 years old, and I know I still in real life react to things because of core misbeliefs. Like, you spend your whole life growing as a person and learning to overcome those things. So you're taking your character on that journey, and the readers are going with them. And if they do react perfectly to every single scenario, that's not realistic. Even in thrillers where they're physically very capable, they'll still quite often make mistakes that are based on emotion and those misbeliefs.
Yeah. Jane Austen's going to come up a lot in our examples in a minute. But if we continue, just round off our kind of top level view of why characters are important and how you can make it happen. So characters grow through challenges and consequences. So this is making sure your character is faced with those tests. They have to face, you've got to create difficult situations that test their beliefs and capabilities. And the choices they make in those moments, the consequences they face, drive their growth and transformation. The other thing, of course, is relationships, how your characters get on with other people, character interact with others, the friends, enemies, romantic interests. That reveals aspects of who they are, and the relationships should evolve in the same way that your character evolves as well. Now, that, I suppose, is much more likely to be something in your genre than thrillers, where we tend not to do the relationship stuff. The two buddies work together and they bicker maybe, and that's about it. But actually, probably in the much better written thrillers, the genre carrés, those relationships, thinking about it, they do develop and change as that character does, because you look, as we do in real life, you change, you just alluded to it. You grow up with a set of beliefs that are handed to you by your upbringing, and then you end up challenging them, losing them, or realizing that some of those are wrong, and that will change your relationship, not just you.
Yeah, and I think that's what, if you really drill down to what readers kind of resonate with, they might not even know it, but it's when, your character's core belief is, I'm not lovable because of whatever childhood event, they call it the shard of glass, whatever thing it was that happened to them in their life that made them believe they're not lovable, which has then influenced all of their future relationships. Deep down, there'll be a lot of readers who feel the same way. And I don't know if you were in Vegas the year that Kate Pickford did her talk, where it was honestly the most emotional. I went in thinking it was a writing craft talk, and it ended up with people standing up and telling everybody what our core wounds were. And we had people standing up saying things like that, like, I believe I wasn't lovable because my parents did this happened to me at school, whatever event it was. And people were crying, and it was really intense. Essentially, that's what makes readers resonate with your character. And even in the best detective novels, if you think about crime detective novels, it's always the detectives' deep, gritty past and the things struggling with that make people want to go through them. And quite often with detective series, it lasts a really long time. It'll be, a 10-book series, and that detective is still struggling with their demons and the things that haunt them, or, that one case that they got wrong. So now they believe that they can't ever let anyone get close because they messed up that one time. So yeah, I think it's possibly good to sit and look at yourself and think about your own self.
Yeah, it's the best person to draw from, isn't it? And even if it's an exaggeration of your...
Before you start doing it for your characters, because then you can start building kind of a 3D version of a person.
Maverick in the original Top Gun is another example of that, and to an extent in the second one, where he's driven by his dad failing, which he really struggles to cope with because he's obviously in this world of elite of fighter pilots where they all succeed, and it's a major flaw for him in the first film. He mucks up, he does things wrong, he gets them into trouble. And in the second film, it's because he felt responsible for Goose's death. That's kind of the shadow on him. It's not quite as well developed in the second film, I don't think, anyway. Okay, so let's move on to some more sort of practical looks at how you actually do that when you're writing the book. So we often talk at the beginning about the ordinary world, and it's a very important part of most storytelling is you show the character in their regular life before the main conflict begins. So in The Hunger Games, we see Katniss hunting to feed her family, immediately establishing her as this resourceful, protective, and hardened by circumstances person. I think when we talk about flaws, whilst you wouldn't want that big challenge, that thing that upends their life to happen in those, you need that establishment at the beginning so the reader understands who they are. But it is absolutely fine to put their flaws in at that point.
Yeah. And it's almost like
that's the normal part of who they are, is that hot-headed temper they've got, or whatever it is that's going to be a problem later in the book.
Yes, it's almost like the Chekhov's gun part of character development, because you're seeding in like this is the thing that's probably going to get them into trouble later, that's going to play a really big role later on in the book. Yeah,
and I can't remember who it was told me that they read somewhere, and there's a really good bit of advice, is when you have a kind of theme, which will be based probably, the theme, we'll talk about theme more in next week's episode, but probably comes towards the end of the first draft process where you work out, that's what this book's about. But when you do have that theme, you need to state it really clearly in that part of the ordinary world at the beginning where everything's normal. You can both have your character flaws in all their glory, your character success in all their glory, because that's all part of the normal world that they live in, but you can also state the theme. In fact, I think one sort of talk on this subject said it should be like literally on the first page. Maybe a secondary character says something like, you're always looking for something that can't be found. That's your problem. So you can literally state it to your readers as not a bad thing. It's part of their ordinary world as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, thinking about Luna. So Luna is my Vampire Mafia book, and that was probably the most recent one I've written where I was really, writing to market, doing all of this stuff, making sure it was like very tight and on point. So her kind of, in romance, I tend to have two different character journeys. So you have the core, like their personal thing that they're struggling with, and then you have the thing that affects the romance. So the reason that they think they can't be with somebody, or that's going to stop them being together with the love interest. So Luna's kind of core misbelief, she has a chronic pain condition, and she believes that pain makes her weak. And so she is not physically or emotionally strong because of this. So in the very first chapter, she is at her bookshop that she works at. So it's like her normal everyday life. She's working at the bookstore, and those things are seeded in. A delivery arrived late at night. She's actually physically in pain, kind of standing, waiting for the delivery to be brought into the shop. And then a bunch of vampires attack her. And because she actually literally says, I'm not going to escape this because I'm not strong enough to fight this. And then weird things start happening, like shadow magic around her. So the reader starts to cotton on to like, oh, actually, hang on, I'm not sure this is true. Like, she's clearly got something here that's going to develop. But that's set up like in the first chapter.
So that's also that list of story types. The old thing is there's only 7 stories, but there's actually about 20. And again, I think it might also be another Pixar list. We'll talk about Pixar next week, but and one of them is you already have what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Which is Wizard of Oz, but there's also that, isn't it? You are already the person you think you can't be.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So that's a good example, as a good point, that in this ordinary world, the beginning of your book, when you've got to write 2 or 3 chapters where everything's normal for your character and you're showing how it doesn't need to be boring, because all this stuff actually needs to be in there. All the the conflict, we haven't talked about that in this bit. The internal conflict needs to be in that ordinary world at the beginning. That's not the inciting incident. The inciting incident is something that happens, is built on top of all of that. So the Ned Stark example, for internal conflict, consider having your characters face situations, and this is a really important thing to understand, where both choices are valid but conflicting. don't set up something where the reader's thinking, well, obviously he's going to do A because B would kill him. A genuinely conflicting set of choices. With Ned Stark's a good example of that. So he's got to choose between honouring his role as Hand of the King or protecting his family. Both are core values for him that he believes in very strongly. They're unresolvable. You can't do both. So that's a really brilliant way of showing the internal conflict. And all of that happens in the ordinary world phase of your book, which is right at the beginning.
That's about the first 10%, isn't it? If you're sort of looking at the Save the Cat kind of structure, and then they have that moment where they leave their ordinary world, and quite often it is them literally physically leaving their ordinary world. So Harry Potter goes off to Hogwarts, Katniss leaves where she is. Like there's so many where they actually
physically leave,
and start their journey.
And Susie Thorne goes to Paris.
Yes, and Luna goes to live with the hot vampire dude. So her choice is, when she's being attacked by all these vampires, a vampire mafia boss who's been secretly stalking her for a few years because he's in love with her, rescues her, and she has a choice. Does she go with the scary vampire guy who's saying, you've got to come with me because I'm going to keep you safe? Or does she stay with the other vampires who are seemingly going to kill her? So that's her choice. And then she actually physically goes off to his mansion. Oh, what shame.
Yeah, where things happen.
Please don't kidnap me.
Don't make me sing. Okay, so the other thing that you do, again, at this beginning stage, there's a lot happens in that ordinary. It's funny how we talk about it being the ordinary world, like their life is normal for them before you turn it upside down, but so much needs to go into that life is normal. And so we've talked about their internal conflict. The other thing that goes in there is their flaws, which we talked about being an important part of the character. So you need to establish that quite early on as well. And the advice here is to show your character's stated beliefs. Contrasting with their actions is a good way of showing a flaw, for instance. So a character might be preachy about honesty whilst telling lies, or claim to be independent while being unable to make decisions without others' approval. So Jane Austen, first time to quote her, masterfully does this with Emma. Emma Woodhouse is the character who believes she's the perfect matchmaker while being blind to her own romantic situation. So all of that is established really early on in the life is normal bit. Some other sort of stuff here which may or may not be of use to you. I mean, background motivation, use strategic flashbacks. I'm not a big fan of flashbacks.
No, I'm not.
Revealing conversations, I think, is better, particularly if your character doesn't want to talk about something, but for some reason has to. Maybe that's a very commonly used. You see this in TV drama quite a lot where, maybe quite early on in the episode, they're being questioned by a doctor or a parent, a psychologist, and they're arguing back because they don't want to, they're staying stum about it. They don't want to talk about it. That's a good way of revealing exactly what that sort of conflict is and where those character bits are.
Yeah, I think in romance, the characters quite often say it to each other quite early on.
Right.
They'll
because
quite
they
often
talk
say,
in romance.
Well, sometimes, but it will quite often be like, an offhand piece of dialogue or something where they will literally say, I can't love anyone because everyone I love dies. And the thing in romance is that you've got to make sure that whatever misunderstanding they have, it couldn't just be solved by a quick conversation. So that core thing that's keeping them apart, that they're trying to get over as characters in order to have an actual happy ending, can't just be easily solved. It's got to be a real kind of deep core thing. Otherwise, it's like, well, they could have just had a chat about that and it would have all been fine. And one of my recommendations actually for books is the Emotional Wound Thesaurus. So I don't know if you've seen, there's all sorts of thesauruses. There's like the villain thesaurus and there's the urban setting thesaurus, and they're absolutely fantastic resources if you haven't ever used one. And the Emotional Wound Thesaurus, I think, if you're somebody who's not naturally inclined towards, understanding people, or you've never really thought about this sort of stuff, it's really really good resource. So I'll give you a really quick...
You're a psychopath. If you're not naturally inclined to understand people. If you're a psychopath... Yeah.
Yes, if you are a psychopath and want to get better at passing off as not being one. No, so I'm just going to give a quick example because obviously I won't read out too much of the contents of the book. But so one of the examples of a core wound would be the character failed to save someone's life at some point in their past. So an example might be not going for help, or going for help and returning too late, or not going for help because they were too scared, aiding someone after an accident but being unable to save them. There's loads and loads and loads of examples. So then it says the basic needs of the character that would be compromised by this wound. For example, love and belonging, safety and security, etc., etc. false beliefs that could be embraced by the character because of this wound. I can't protect the people I love. I'm weak and ineffective. It should have been me instead. Then it lists what that character might fear. So being responsible for others, failing a loved one when they're in need. And then it goes even further to talk about possible responses, like how this could manifest in their actual behavior. So like avoiding responsibility, having flashbacks, difficulty sleeping, making excuses why they can't commit to things. There are absolutely tons of these. Then it goes even deeper into personality traits that they could develop because of these core wounds, triggers that could activate the core wounds, and then opportunities to overcome them. So it's an absolutely brilliant resource that it was just one entry in this thesaurus. Yeah. So I have it on Kindle. Most craft books I buy as paperback, but this one I have on Kindle because I find it easier to actually search for things and flip backwards and forwards. And that was just one example of one core wound. So if you are sort of struggling with that and what to give your characters or what that might look like in terms of their behavior, I really recommend it.
A really good resource. And why do you need the wound? You don't just give your character a wound for the sake of it. You give your character a wound because that's how the story is going to work later on. So why, I'll give you an example. We've been watching, for my genre, we've been watching the Tom Clancy Jack Ryan series made a few years ago with John Krasinski as Jack Ryan. And in that, Jack Ryan's a CIA operative, he's a desk operative. He was in the Marines briefly, but he's now a desk analyst. But he gets dragged into the real world, which is very Tom Clancy. These are all new stories, but they're based on the character that Clancy wrote in the 80s. He gets dragged into the field in Afghanistan, etc. And he's like an analyst. What the hell am I doing here? But he does surprising things, like when there's a moment when all the army around him, the trained professionals who are all armed to the teeth, say, "We are out of here now." He goes back in to the baddie and says, "No, you tell me now." And you're thinking, what the hell's he done that? But it's the right thing to do because he's spotted something. Now, they gradually reveal his wound in the series. And at the end, I think it might even be the second series. So he was in a helicopter crash, and that's why he was medically discharged from the Marines. But you see the full story towards the end of the series, which is as they're getting onto this helicopter to evacuate a family from a village in Afghanistan, there was a young kid who plays a little trick on him and then asks for $10 for the cleverness of his card trick. And he says, "Yeah, all right, you can have it." And then as they're leaving, he sees the kid standing by himself. He has no parents. He's crying. And he looks at the helicopter and said, why don't you take me? Why can't I go? Because I haven't, and in the end, he sort of scoops him up, sticks him on the helicopter. And on the helicopter, the kid's at the far end of it. He's inside it and he gives him a little wink, and the kid winks back and then shows him the grenade. He's pulled the pin out. And then he blows the helicopter up and a load of people die. And Ryan survives. That's a hell of an emotional wound to carry with you.
Yep.
He cries one night with his girlfriend. It all comes out. But the brilliance of that wound, that emotional wound he's carrying, he feels responsible for the deaths of all those people and his stupid decision, sort of naive decision at the time. But that's the reason he almost doesn't care about his own life when he's back in a dangerous situation, and he can actually do something, this once in a lifetime opportunity to ignore the people saying, "Don't go in there again." Or, he does it. He's in a room full of people the very first time he's ever in a meeting with the president, and he's on the back wall. Everyone's around the table in front of him. And at the end of the meeting, he stands up and says, "Mr. President," to get his attention because he knows there's something else that needs to be done on this mission. And the whole room look at him. Now you think that's unrealistic. Why would he do that? But it makes sense. This guy needs to close this wound, and he doesn't really care if he fails. He just needs to close this wound. And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of how that emotional wound influences the plot. And that's what becomes the story. So the story becomes that interplay of that character, working through their emotional wound and the actions that they take and how that moves the plot forward. And it's that interplay that will make people keep watching it.
That's the genius. That is the secret sauce. If all these things work together, then that's the secret sauce. And it is hard. It takes a bit of planning. Okay, so we have some tips here for sort of ways that you can show that character and show those flaws. Writing scenes from multiple characters' viewpoints to show how they perceive each other differently can help. Use dialogue to reveal character through what's said and what's left unsaid. Creating mirror characters who are similar, share traits, but make different choices. Showing small moments of decision that are building to larger character changes. Using physical descriptions and mannerisms that can reflect internal states, Kaiser Sose, maybe, for instance. developing character-specific vocabulary and speech patterns. That's something I don't think I do very well, but I would read good novels where the whole language changes, the type of language changes in the POV for one particular character.
Yeah, I don't do that very naturally in my own stuff. In the ghostwriting stuff that I do, and this has helped me massively with this because of working to those outlines and the way that they plan the characters. There will literally be like mannerisms listed and certain, like if they use any key phrases and things like that. So that's helped me to start doing it more in my own books. Yeah. But I think it's something that I struggle with.
Good idea to have like a post-it note on your screen in front of you listing character traits of your characters to remind you when you're writing them to get those in there. Okay, let's talk about some example character arcs that are good examples. Go back to Jane Austen, one of the great. If you've never read any Jane Austen, I would thoroughly recommend it. And I, as a thriller, grizzled old thriller writer and reader, I can tell you I've never laughed as much in my life. They're witty, satirical books. But Pride and Prejudice, you may have seen the films, the TV series. So this is a good example of how to set up that ordinary life for her. And the ordinary life for Lizzie Bennet, the main character, is that she's judgmental and dismissive. And small things happen at first to challenge that. But they increase the complex situations around her that challenge all her quick judgments, from misjudging Wickham at the beginning to confronting her own prejudice ultimately about Darcy, who she ends up marrying, having sort of dismissed and hated for most of the book. So these are not big, you often think, well, this must be easy if you're writing Tom Clancy stuff. You can have him in a helicopter crash and you can have him talking to the president. But actually this is Pride and Prejudice is set in somebody's front room, and it's a tiny little kitchen sink drama, but all of those same things happen within those conversations. Are you back? Did you have a little wobble?
I am back. Then? I don't know who disappeared there, if it was me or you.
Well, I think I carried on talking, so I think we'll probably be okay. So I want to give that as a good example, and give one more. I'm going to let you talk. I realise I've been talking for ages. Okay, Michael.
Right, I'm enjoying listening to you.
Michael Corleone, very different from Lizzie Bennet. From The Godfather, represents one of the most famous tragic transformations. So he starts off as this principled war hero, and he knows what his family's into. They're mafia in Sicily. He wants nothing to do with the criminal enterprise. But in the end, of course, he becomes the most ruthless criminal boss, even worse than his father. So his arc shows how circumstances, family obligation, and maybe a talent, for the things on that side of the business that he can't avoid in the end, transforming into somebody completely different than he was at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was mentioned in your research, was it? The question of, does a character really have to change, like by the end of the novel?
Yeah.
And I would probably, I think most of the time, but not necessarily in a hugely obvious way.
I agree. In fact, there's a comedy character called Alan Partridge, who I reference occasionally. I'm often compared to him here in the UK, and they did a film, Alpha Papa, a couple of years ago. A very funny film with him. And what I noticed about the writing, brilliantly written, is that he deliberately did not change one iota through the film, despite everything that happened through him. He went through a kidnapping, because that's very true to his character. He's an idiot, basically. It's sort of Mr. Bean-like, there's no change. So sometimes it's the right thing to do to have lots of things happening around them, and how they negotiate it is the action or the comedy or whatever, or the romance side of it, but they themselves don't change. I think another example is Christian Grey, but we'll come on to some criticised examples of character arcs in a moment, but that is another one.
Yeah. I mean, I think in most of my books, my characters do develop, but it's usually over a series rather than one book, which feels a bit more believable to me if it happens. Like if you think about, like we said, about those detective novels or those thrillers where it's the same character over many, many, many books, but they're always kind of developing. And quite often I think you're told to kind of make your character react to, we said you show them in one situation in that first kind of opening, this is their ordinary life, and then you'll kind of replicate that later on so that you can see the difference in how they react in both situations. But I think in romance, there is that element of that there's always a happy ending in romance. So they have to overcome whatever it is that's keeping them apart in order to be together. And it's that like happily ever after, but for now kind of thing. We don't ever get to the point usually where they're married and they've got kids and maybe those issues start coming up again. Yeah. Like in romance, it's kind of assumed that they both get over whatever the hell it was that was stopping them from just meeting, falling in love and being a couple within the first 3 chapters. So I think that's maybe slightly different from other genres, that they pretty much unanimously have to change enough to overcome that and be together.
Yes, I think in that area that would be hard to have somebody not changing. I think so. Another example is the fall from grace. So that almost, I guess, sort of echoing Godfather is Walter White in Breaking Bad. Whose arc is based on necessity at the beginning. If you haven't seen the series, a brilliant TV series.
I love it so much.
Yeah, many people quote it as being the best. It's absolutely gripping. You could start it now. I think it would be completely relevant.
Apart from the Fly episode, that was the worst episode of the lot.
That was a writer's strike, though, wasn't it? Do you know that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
There's famously an episode where they're just chasing a fly in a lab for the entire episode.
Yeah.
So he starts off, and you're sympathetic to him. He's got a terminal cancer diagnosis. He's in America without, the healthcare money to pay for it. He's been a teacher, I think, high school teacher or something like that. So he's got no money to provide for his family, but he's a chemist and he can make drugs pretty well. And he thinks he could probably do this and just build some cash. But his fall from grace is a bit like the Corleone ones. He has a gift for this stuff. And you could argue what happened is his true character was revealed. It was just suppressed in this domestic.
Yeah, it's almost a villain arc, really, wasn't it? Yeah. Because of what he becomes. Like, to start with, it's all quite accidental. And for a long time, all of the really terrible things that happen and that he does, there's always a reason for it, and you can see it. And like you said, you feel sorry for him. But then there comes a point in the series where you start to think, like the way he is with his wife, and then certain other things that he does, like the one choice that he makes with Jesse, where I won't spoiler it. Yeah,
Oh, that was such a low moment. But that was interesting. So these moments are put in. There's a few moments that event, which you won't describe if you want to watch the series. I can remember Jill and I being genuinely puzzled about what we're now thinking about Walter White. That's the genius of Breaking Bad, by the way. There's no clear. There's no for most of that series, there's no clear moral guide for the viewer. But there are 2 other quotes in there which people always quote. One is a line where he says, "I'm the one who knocks." When Jesse says they're going to knock on our door, and another line is, "I'm in the empire business." So 2 lines where gradually you realise his pride, his conceit, his arrogance, his nastiness. They didn't come from nowhere. Yeah. They were there. So this fall from grace was really a revelation of who this person was.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is a long-winded way of the story that unfortunately we see in the press occasionally, which is somebody who's lived a mild-mannered life just suddenly flips and goes and kills their family or mass shooting or something.
It's kind of you think of the character arc and you think of them growing as a person and becoming better as a person. But that doesn't necessarily have to be it. Like in this case, he's actually becoming, the villain, like I said, the villain story. But I think as well, when you're crafting villains, don't assume that this is only the character development stuff is only things you need to think about in terms of your hero or your main characters. Like the best villains are the ones that have this stuff as well. Just like it's your hero needs to have flaws, your villain needs to have a couple of redeeming qualities, like a couple of nice things that they do that make them that CD person. That's why villain origin stories are so popular, aren't they? In movies, in books, people are really Wicked. That's huge at the moment. We can have a whole different conversation about character development in Wicked.
So it's also rubbish.
James Blatch,
opinion.
You just got us cancelled.
It is a bit of a divider, though. I've got quite a few friends who think the same as me, sort of fell asleep and it didn't really grab us at all. So I actually felt quite angry that it was disrespectful to the original film. But anyway,
I can't engage with you on this topic.
Absolutely love it, including you. And my daughter absolutely loves it, raved about it, gone to see it several times. So anyway, let's carry on. Let's do a couple of positive character arcs. I've done Walter White and Michael Corleone. So Jane Eyre, often quoted as the first feminist novel, if you want to go down that route. Her arc, Jane Eyre's arc, shows through adversity while maintaining core principles, she develops from a passionate but powerless child into a woman who achieves independence and true love without compromising her moral convictions and sense of self-worth. Another classic arc, of course, and perhaps the most classic arc in that period of literature, is Ebenezer Scrooge, Charles Dickens. Carol's Christmas Carol represents a dramatic positive transformation from a bitter miser to a generous, compassionate man. His arc's effective because we see both why he became so hardened in the first place and what helps him reconnect with his family.
Yeah,
and
I was going to say, that's a classic, like, you actually literally get shown his core wounds. Like the 3 ghosts come to him and they show him and the reader exactly why he is the way he is.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you kind of start feeling a little bit sorry for Scrooge.
Yes, by the end you definitely do. So the arcs work, the good arcs work because they feel earned through clear cause and effect. So it's very obvious to a reader when things are shoehorned in. That's just why I'm going back and rewriting the beginning of my book, because I want there to be proper motivation for the reasons that Susie does her things. They maintain character consistency even through change. They connect personal growth to larger themes. They show both external and internal transformation. They balance change with core character traits. So not too much to think about, just everything as you do your character arc. So there is a section on, I think we're going to jump to, we talked about, does a character need to change? And there are examples where Sherlock Holmes is another example of a character who doesn't change. Potentially now I think we would talk about him being on an autistic spectrum, the way he operates, doesn't quite read other people's emotions. And
some of the great detectives, they don't necessarily change, but there's still interest in finding out why they are the way they are. So that can still be enough to make somebody read through, not necessarily hoping for them to change, but just wanting to find out what that is that makes them the way that they are.
I do think you've got to be careful with those examples, because I think that's a really, Conan Doyle, brilliant writer. It's a difficult write to have your main character so consistent all the way through. It's frustrating watching Holmes. You're on Watson's side, aren't you? In those annoying conversations where Holmes is dismissive and arrogant and not listening, although he obviously is listening in real life. So although Holmes always wins with his brilliance, he's a not particularly likable character. So I think that's brilliant, the way Conan Doyle's done it. We love it, but hard. That's like next level of writing. You're better off to have, I'll give you an example of where it doesn't work very well. There was a series of superhero films. When Marvel started doing their films, I was working at the BBFC watching a lot of these films, and they all had these quite good arcs. And then one came out, and I think it was because of Sony or someone like Sony had bought Incredible Hulk like 10 years before, and they were about to lose it. So Marvel, obviously, they're going to get Incredible Hulk back and put him into their film. So they did an Incredible Hulk film, and it was poor. It was a poor film. And the problem was quite hard to say, is that there was a completely flat arc. Story. And even I, before I started writing and really analysing stuff, could see that the character at the beginning, who was a bit lost trying to work out his back, was the same character at the end, and nothing in the middle changed his character. All that happened is he reacted to situations. And so that's a good example. It's the trying to think of his name. I think it was in that poker film a few years ago. I'll look it up in a second so people can, if you want to. It's a poor film because of that. So I would be wary about flat character arcs. It's like, it sounds easier than doing a complex character arc, but it's not. I think it's harder.
Yeah, agreed. So should we talk about like some tips for how people can actually get to know their characters a bit better? Because if you're trying to figure this out, so there's some things like, I think you mentioned, like imagining your character in different situations and actually writing out some kind of sketches where you put them in like the grocery store with the checkout clerk being really awful to them and how they would react to that, and dialogue and different things. But I know that some people have started to use things like ChatGPT or Claude, where they've given them the kind of outline of their character, so the things that they know about their character, and then said, I want to have a conversation with you as if you are this character, and then actually had a chat and kind of interviewed them and been like, well, why do you do this? And well, what is it about you that makes you do this? And again, the answers that the AI gives you isn't necessarily what you're going to use. But if you're somebody that struggles to kind of think through this stuff in your own head or just map it out on paper or type it, whatever, it can be quite an interesting way to get your brain to start thinking like that and to have that actual kind of conversation with your character. I know Jo Penn talks about this a lot more on one of her podcasts, that it might be worth looking up what she said about it. She's really good at using AI for the character development stuff now.
Yeah, I just had a futuristic sci-fi idea, kind of Michael Crichton-like story where when somebody dies and you miss them so much, we download everything about them so you can continue having conversations. Then in the future, you can't disentangle the artificial version of them from the real person. It becomes a big issue in society. Anyway.
That feels like a Black Mirror episode.
Yeah.
If it hasn't already been written, I'm sure that someone's writing it now. So what other tips are there? What else do you do when you're thinking about your characters?
Well,
do you actually sit and kind of list these things about them? Do you get to know them as you're writing and it kind of reveals itself?
Yeah, I think in first draft is different from second draft for me. So first draft, I do tend to write and see how they react. I often think about when I'm actually writing is literally putting yourself in their mind rather than say, this is where I want this scene to go. As I'm writing, it occurs to me they're not going to say that. This person doesn't say that. This person goes in that direction, which is a problem for me as a writer because I need exit A here, but they go out exit B. And I don't mean to sort of, I'm not sure what's going to happen to the story next, but you do have to follow your characters. I think that for me is it is kind of an organic way of doing what you were talking about, is listing out how they'd react to it and then doing it. But just letting them breathe and live a little bit as a character and make their own choices whilst you're writing, even if you're kind of a plotter.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think that there's a difference. I mean, now I tend to think about these things. To start with, I'll kind of list like core wound, misbelief, that kind of thing. And I know that that's the arc that I'm trying to get through. And then I write and it kind of flows quite naturally. I don't make that many changes, but I know when I started writing, I would always write my first draft, then go back and really spend some time looking at whether that arc worked and whether I need, like you're doing now, going back to the beginning, whether I needed to seed anything in a bit sooner. And actually really analysing whether the way that they were saying things was true and if things needed to be made a little bit more believable. So it's something that I think happens more naturally for me now, but I definitely used to have that first draft and then look at those kind of things on a second draft, like a second go through.
Yeah. Should we talk about some bad examples of story arcs?
Yeah, let's do some bad examples.
So we mentioned Bella Swan, Twilight series. Often cited as an example of an underdeveloped characterization, she largely serves as a blank slate defined primarily by her relationships rather than having clear passions, opinions, or agency of her own. So there's an argument that Suzanne Collins did that.
I think Suzanne Collins was Hunger Games.
Hunger Games, was she? Who wrote Twilight? Terrible.
God,
why do we know this?
Twilight. Hang on, Stephanie Meyer.
Stephanie Meyer. There's an argument that she put that in so that it's like a canvas for the projection of the reader. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, only she could tell us, couldn't she?
Yes, well, we're not.
I tend to agree, and I think that's important. Is that your characters shouldn't just be reacting to things; they shouldn't be kind of just buffeted around from one action to another.
It's like 101, but sometimes you'll find, and the next example is exactly, there's a big budget film that's in the glare of publicity where they don't get that right. And the next example is Rey in Star Wars in the sequel trilogy, and particularly The Rise of Skywalker. And she suffers what people consider inconsistent character development. Her abilities and power level seem to fluctuate based on plot needs rather than clear progression. And her background story changed significantly across the trilogy, suggesting a lack of clear character planning from the beginning. And that's very obvious through those films. They're quite enjoyable films, but if you contrast that, if you want to look, we talk about setting ordinary world at the same time as showing the flaws, the internal conflict, and then turning the world upside down, that kind of first third of the book. One of the greatest examples in history is the original Star Wars film, where you have Luke Skywalker as a farm boy, and we see his boredom, his frustration, we see his hot-headedness to make mistakes, and then his world's turned upside down with the death of his adoptive parents, and he goes off on his adventure. That's a brilliant way of doing it, of establishing that. We see he's kind of, people often criticize that film for its dialogue, etc., but it's a really strong story. And if you then look at Luke Skywalker's arc through the 3 films, where he, again, in the middle film, his hot-headedness, he leaves his training to save his friends, even though it says, don't do that, it's the wrong course. That's entirely consistent with what we saw in the first half an hour of the first film, where he just goes off and does something because he thinks it's the right thing to do at that time without taking a longer view. Now, maybe by the end of the third film, he's matured a little bit and realised his responsible role in life, but there's the character development. So all of that's well thought through and consistent. Ray and Star Wars sequel trilogy is used as an example of not getting it right. I haven't seen Constantine. Have you seen that 2005 film?
Yeah, I mean, back in 2005, I don't remember it. You know what I did see recently, though, because we almost talked about this ages ago when we first started recording and I hadn't watched it at the time, Gladiator 2. And I think you can contrast.
Have you seen it?
Yes, I watched it at the weekend. Gladiator 1 for an absolutely incredible character development versus Gladiator 2 for where I enjoyed it visually. It was lovely. There was some good music. Like, the costumes were great. Could I tell you what the character arc was? No. Could I tell you what the growth? No.
Who did you even want to back in that film? I didn't know whose side I was on.
I don't know, because the baddies weren't particularly well developed or interesting. There was no real reason for their behaviour. They were just a little bit loopy, weren't they? It was all just, we could do an entire webinar on the difference between Gladiator 1 and Gladiator 2.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because the first Gladiator film is so well set out, such a strong motivation. And by the end of it, if you're not crying at the end of that film, you haven't watched it properly. The second film, you're half looking at your watch thinking, I guess this is
I just genuinely didn't. I genuinely didn't really care.
Yeah, it's surprising.
I just didn't really care about any of it. And the moment that's supposed to be totally like the bit that rips your heart out, I just was like, I don't care enough about these characters.
The John Constantine example that I found somewhere was that the film loses much of what made the comic character compelling, his working class British background, manipulative nature and complex morality in favour of a more generic action hero persona. So they kind of stripped away the complexity for the film. Christian Grey, we mentioned 50 Shades, a character whose supposedly dark and complex nature is told rather than shown. So his troubled past is used to explain his behaviour, but the character never develops beyond surface level traits and contradictory actions that serve the plot rather than create coherent personalities. So the examples are given there share the following common problems: relying on external plot points rather than the internal consistency for character decisions, telling rather than showing character traits, inconsistent abilities or knowledge based on plot needs. And by the way, the Star Wars prequels, as well as the sequels, are examples of just inventing magic elements of the Force because it suited that particular scene. Lack of clear motivation for actions, which I think is probably one for Gladiator 2. Missing or contradictory character backgrounds and personality traits that appear and disappear as the plots require. So, I talked earlier about being in a scene where your character goes out exit B instead of exit A, which is annoying. But it's really important to allow that to happen because that stops you then leveraging, bending around your behaviour for the plot that you've worked out. And that's really obvious to the reader when that happens. So the plot has to feel more organic than that.
Yeah, and I think it might be worth, we talk about films quite a lot when we talk about craft, but that's because it's if you want to do some research, spending an hour and a half studying a film isn't a huge investment of your time, and it's much more condensed. Like, the story is condensed because it has to fit into an hour and a half. So it's much, much more obvious to you. So look up some examples, Google bad character development in films and then watch a couple. Because sometimes watching the bad character development is just as revealing and useful as watching good character development. And when you are watching films, try and drill down into why it is that's really grabbed you. We've talked about Happy Valley before, haven't we, where those are just characters that are absolutely, it's a British crime drama and it is
superb. Yeah.
Perfection, absolute perfection. Both the heroine, who's played by Sarah Lancashire, and the villain, they are both amazing characters and I think it's 3 series of that.
4 maybe.
Yeah, so study some film and TV if you want to try and see more obvious examples, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, that's been our discussion about character. Do you feel motivated?
Yeah. I do. I have one more recommendation, which is The Emotional Craft of Fiction. So we'll maybe put the links in there, but that one's a really good one, as you can see by all the. These are actually Sasha Black's notes. She gave me this copy, but that is a really good one if this is something that's a bit new to you and you've not. If you're a psychopath.
Yes, what was that expression used? If you find it hard to read people's emotions.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, in next week's episode, which we're going to record tomorrow so I can have a holiday, we are going to go through the 22 rules of storytelling as published by Pixar about 30 years ago, and it does the rounds to this day because they're golden, every single one of them.
I'm excited about this. And as somebody who has a 7-year-old child, I am confident that I can excel on quoting any Pixar movie example.
There you go.
Quote.
We'll try and dig out the, whatever it is, 20 different story types as well, which is also, I think, a Pixar list, but I'm going to try and find that.
And this is something that Save the Cat, I've mentioned it hundreds of times, but it's fantastic because it was based on how to write movies, and then they did Save the Cat writes a novel. So
Save the Cat, by the way, is my rec for storytelling. I mean, I've read a few of these books, The Story Grid, and a few others, like a name I can't even remember now. But Save the Cat is the one I go back to all the time. And I probably subconsciously quoted it tonight, so you give some in this episode.
Yeah. To all the people we've subconsciously quoted in this episode, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, because I really took on board what they talked about.
I did. I mean, that was my Bible for my first couple of novels. That I literally had, the little cards, like physical cards, where I plotted it out, and then I had the character cards as well. And that's always my recommendation for people when they're first getting started with this stuff.
Definitely.
Also, Story Genius by Lisa Cron is a good one as well.
Yeah. Okay, all right, let's say goodbye to this episode. Thank you very much indeed for listening. Don't forget, we're going to be in Ireland in March. You can come and join us, indiewritersclub.com/Ireland. Oh, I didn't mention the retreat. So we are firmed up the dates of the retreat, which is going to be the 27th, 28th and 29th. Mm-hmm. We are still waiting just for one or two little bits of costings to come in before we set the price and open the doors for tickets. There are 20 places. I guess 20 places plus us. I mean, there's more than 20
because we did that thing
list,
that you do when you're planning a wedding, didn't we? And we were like,
forgot us.
We forgot us. Yes, I think 20 plus me and you. Yeah, we don't count.
But that's it. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great rest of the day.
All right, goodbye.
Sign up for episode alerts at indiewritersclub.com. Come and chat with us at our exclusive Discord server at indiewritersclub.com/Discord. Or join our Facebook group at indiewritersclub.com/Facebook. And you can support the podcast at indiewritersclub.com/support. And don't forget to share your weekly word counts, because no matter what you've achieved this week, we're here to cheer you on. Thank you for being part of the Indie Writers Club.
The Indie Writers Club was brought to you by Publish Drive. With one click, self-publish your ebooks, audiobooks and print books to thousands of stores and libraries worldwide. And now you can start for free forever. Publish Drive's new free plan lets you publish your first ebook absolutely free. No subscription fees, no commissions, keep 100% of the royalties. Get your titles online in just a few minutes at publishdrive.com.